Alright guys, so today I'm going to be walking you through my Striker D3 FNC PvE build, and it's a core premise of rewarding you more for completing content, not just completing content easier. The build does excel primarily at PvE, it is not to be used for PvP, and what it will do is give you more rewards for each activity that you complete than you normally would get with a different build, as well as make that completion easier and faster. It utilizes 4-piece Striker, 2-piece D3 FNC, the Pakhan. It doesn't really matter what your secondary or your sidearm are, and then a specific set of skills and talents, which I'll go over in a moment, and then I'll kick it over to some gameplay. Starting off with, we have our Striker's backpack. Now, it's important to note that this is very similar to a previous PvE build that I did utilizing the Medved, and that is still viable. Using this same build construction and using the Medved will yield very, very potent results in PvE, but this one centers on the 2-piece D3 FNC as an augmentation to the Striker, and then the Pakhan as a primary, and that's why I thought it was different enough to do a build video on it. Now, talking specifically about my backpack, what we have here is armor. You're always going to roll armor there. I have a decent firearms roll. You should always aim for over 1200. I have 1193, which is close enough. It does suit my purposes. And then ammo capacity. This is actually integral to the build. You need to have ammo capacity on your backpack in particular because you're not going to be rolling it on your chest piece. And we'll talk about that more in a moment. But ammo capacity as a minor attribute is absolutely essential. Outside of that, we're just going to talk about Striker for a moment here. The 10% enemy armor damage is very, very good. And the 4-piece, which is where the bulk of your damage comes from if you have good aim, is going to be invaluable. Every consecutive hit deals 1% more damage. So it's very important to choose your shots with this build. But that being said, you don't need to operate at 100% stacks in order to make the build function. Basically, the potency of the build is going to be increased drastically based on how accurate you are. So for me, it's not that high, but for a lot of other players, and probably on PC in particular, this build is going to function very, very, very well. Next up, we have our Striker's gloves. Now, it's important to roll these a specific way. What you want is LMG damage, critical hit chance, and damage to elites. I would prefer 10% damage to elites, but 9% serves my purposes just fine. I have a very high firearms roll here at 1230. That's very good for boosting my overall base damage. And then LMG damage is absolutely core here. 1200, in addition to what you're already going to be dealing with the Pakhan, which scales very well with firearms, is going to make the build deal absolutely phenomenal amounts of damage. Now, outside of that, there's not much more that's important to roll. You want to look at your base armor roll on gloves. Something over about 960 is going to be ideal. 980 is optimal, but something like 855 is not going to be what you want, or 860 or 870. Those are very low-rolled armor gloves. This is something I haven't been taking into consideration very much lately. I've only recently started to really pay attention to this, and that is the base armor on your actual piece of gear is very important for boosting mitigation. And that's another reason why this build excels, and I'll talk about that more when I go over my character sheet. Next up, we have this Striker's holster. Very straightforward item in any build. You're going to want to look at the base armor roll. 1588 is fantastic. You're going to want to look at the main stat rolls. I have done very well for myself here. 1251 in firearms, 1270 in stamina, and 1270 in electronics. This is essentially a GOG-rolled holster. I am very happy to have this roll. You should aim for over 1200 in all three categories, over 1250 if possible, and then the major attribute is always going to be armor. Last up for our Striker's gear, we have the mask. Now, this mask is very important to roll a specific way. What you want is a decent firearms or stamina roll, whatever you're opting for. I have opted for firearms for better scaling. And then what you absolutely need is damage to elites and enemy armor damage for the major and minor attributes. 9% damage to elites is going to be applicable to most of the hardest endgame bosses or NPCs, and enemy armor damage is going to be applicable to both purple and elite enemies, and it will be active for the majority of NPC health bars. Again, this is specialized specifically for PvE. While enemy armor damage does translate to PvP, damage to elites does not. So this is something you're always going to be running against only NPCs, but it is very, very efficient. So that is the way that you want to roll your mask. Next up, we have our first piece of D3 FNC, and that is the vest. Now, this is where some of the more interesting components of the build come into play. The first thing to note is that we're rolling damage to elites and armor on our vest, again to increase that raw damage output, especially against yellow enemies. I've got a high stamina roll here to increase my toughness, and then the most important thing on this chest is the 25% increased kill XP. That is why it is essential to roll ammo capacity on your backpack, because you will not have it on your chest piece. This is designed towards increasing the actual proficiency cash yield from any activity that you complete. Not only is this build designed to complete activities quickly, but also to increase the rewards from any activity that you choose to complete. That is why I believe that this is one of my better PvE builds, and that's why I felt comfortable putting it out, even though there is a similar Striker Medved build in existence already on our channel. Last up for gear, we have these D3 FNC knee pads. Now, these are one of the most critical components of the build overall, and it will take some time to get knee pads that will fit this roll properly, but when you do, it's very, very valuable. So the first thing to note is that I have a high stamina roll. I have augmented it with a stamina mod, but I'll talk about my gear mods in a moment. I have an armor roll on my major attribute slot. That is essential. You always want armor there. It's a very large chunk of armor. It's always important to look at your base armor roll as well. Up in the 2,800 or 2,900 range is ideal. Again, but you can get a little bit higher, so it's important to keep an eye out for that. And then for the minor attributes, this is where it becomes essential to get the proper roll on knee pads. You need increased kill XP and enemy armor damage. Enemy armor damage, same as before, is going to be applicable to almost all PvE targets most of the time. And then increased kill XP will increase the amount of proficiency catches that you get. This is the optimal rolling for knee pads, and once you have this, it's going to drastically increase the efficiency of your build in PvE. Another thing to note, and I haven't really addressed this so far, is the reason we are running 2-piece D3 FNC is the 15% protection from elites. A lot of people would opt to switch this out for 2-piece Nomad or something similar. As you can see here, for Nomad, you have 15% health on kill. But I think personally that 15% flat protection from elites during all situations is going to be much more valuable. This build is essentially a super tank in PvE. It does not apply to PvP. You can still die to enemy players. However, if you are tanking enemy elites, etc., you are going to be a super tank through a variety of different mechanisms, and it is very, very valuable. So that is why we've opted to run 2-piece D3 FNC, and the knee pads are rolled the way that they are. Moving on to weapons, there is only one of consequence, and that is the Pakhan. Now, I would strongly advise purchasing this immediately from the special weapons vendor in the base of operations, as it currently is a god roll. It has very, very good base damage scaling. It also has very good damage to targets out of cover at 14%, and it's a very valuable PvE weapon, if not the best PvE weapon in the game at this time in my eyes. Now, the reason for this is because the RPM is amazing for an LMG. The mag size is great, up over 90 if modded correctly. The base damage scaling is phenomenal. And then it comes built in with Swift, Destructive, and Ferocious. And as you can see, I have rerolled Swift to Brutal. That being said, you can reroll it to any talent that you're comfortable with or leave it on there, as it will boost your overall efficiency in PvE. Now, the reason that this gun is so good is Destructive and Ferocious is in the 3rd slot. This allows you to spec heavily into firearms and stamina while still getting the bonus 10% damage to elites. All of these different things, including Destructive, stack on top of each other to create a phenomenal PvE build that will absolutely shred enemy NPCs. Talking about both my weapon and gear mods very, very quickly, the only important thing to know is that you need an extended magazine on the Pakhan for increased magazine size. Outside of that, nothing really matters. Rate of fire is good. Critical hit chance, again, is good. But the most critical component is increased magazine size. That will allow you to deal more damage more frequently during PvE encounters. And then the second most important thing is having headshot damage on your muzzle. Whatever muzzle you choose to run with, I have an Omega rifle suppressor here that has headshot damage, critical hit damage, and accuracy, but headshot damage is the critical component. For a scope, you can run something like what I have here, which has critical hit chance. However, I would strongly recommend headshot damage again if you can find it and mod it on there, because you will be aiming for the head the majority of the time, and especially since I have Brutal on this gun, it's going to pair very, very well. For every single gear mod, I have opted to run Stamina with Armor to increase my toughness, again allowing me to face trade, pick up my Striker's bonus, as well as rack up proficiency caches. It's something that's very, very valuable there. Again, that's every single mod, Stamina with Armor, and then for every single performance mod, I have opted to run Pulse Critical Hit Chance or Pulse Critical Hit Damage. 3 Pulse Critical Hit Chance here, as you can see in my backpack and my knee pads, and then 1 Pulse Critical Hit Damage in my holster. This is because enemy NPCs cannot counterpulse you. They cannot run a scrambler, and they cannot conceal themselves from your pulse, so you will always have that burst damage potential against enemy NPCs. They will not be concealed. Now, what this means is that you are going to be sacrificing first aid self-heal. Your self-heal is not going to be potent, but it's okay because you have very, very high toughness, and you have the increased mitigation against elite enemies with 15% protection from elites built right into the D3 FNC 2-piece that you are opting to run. For abilities, it's pretty straightforward why I've chosen these two. I run Booster Shot for increased damage and damage resistance. This is going to allow me to walk right up to enemies, pop it, gain bonus mitigation, face trade, proc Striker, and then melt them down extremely quickly whenever I feel like. However, you can opt for something else if you'd like to, though Booster Shot in this situation is the best in slot. And then I have opted to run Pulse. This increases my DPS and my burst potential drastically. I am running Tactical Scanner because I will only be using this in PvE situations. I will not be using this in the Dark Zone, but as soon as you transition into the Dark Zone, switch it out for Scrambler. But anyone out there wishing to run different skills can. You can run something like a Flame Turret for CC. This will keep enemies stationary, allowing you again to stack Striker extremely efficiently, as well as melt them down very, very fast. And then you can also opt for something like Smart Cover. Again, if you are taking cover constantly, this will increase your mitigation and keep you alive longer. It all feeds into that super tank build style. It allows you to stack Striker, keeps you alive while upping your damage output progressively, and becomes a very efficient PvE build. For talents, it's pretty straightforward. If you are running solo, you are always going to opt for Critical Save, Up here in the right-hand corner, on the move, both of these will feed into the tank nature of the build with 30% mitigation from on the move and a potential 40% from critical save, keeping you alive in a lot of messy situations. And then you will also offer one is none, since you will be headshotting the enemies as often as possible. And since you have a very high magazine size, this is going to pair very well with the Pakhan and its base style of gameplay. And then you're going to opt for Strike Back. Now, this will allow you to pop your booster shot more often, meaning more burst damage, more pulses, and more healing overall, and more mitigation and resistance. Now, as soon as you're in a squad, you do want to swap these out. Strike Back can become Combat Medic. That is invaluable as soon as you are in a squad, style of gameplay where there's multiple teammates, because it's 40% of their health bar every time you pop a medkit, and if everyone runs that, you can keep each other alive rather frequently and efficiently. And then you're going to swap out one is none, quite possibly for Triage, because that, as soon as you have 4 people in a group, is a very potent tool of increasing the frequency with which you can pop your heals and your pulses, etc. So again, it varies based on solo or group play, but those are the talent formats for both. Lastly, before I kick it over to some gameplay, I'm going to show my character sheet. There's a few important factors to know. First is that we have a high base health pool. This feeds into the tank aspect. It's a hybrid stamina firearms build. And then the most important things are critical hit chance. That is a little bit higher, and it is augmented by a very powerful pulse, since we do have performance mods in our gear slots that allow for pulse to have more critical hit chance. Critical hit damage, nothing impressive, but headshot damage, very important again, to get as high headshot damage as possible. That allows you to melt down enemy NPCs in particular very, very quickly. Moving on, there's a couple more key factors. We go all the way down here to combat. Damage to elites and enemy armor damage. That's close to 80% increased damage to most of the NPCs that you will encounter. Again, allows you to melt extremely quickly. Very important to prioritize both of those stat points in your gear. And then down here in survivability, very important to pay attention to the actual armor rolls on your gear itself, because 55.28% paired on top of the 15% protection from elites from D3 F and C, and your booster shots mitigation, and on the move and critical save, you're going to be in little to no danger of dying with this build if used properly. It's a very, very powerful build. As you can see here, again, protection from elites at 15%. That's actually a core component. Moving on from there, I am going to kick it over some gameplay, but mouse over the rest of my character sheet just in case you guys are curious about any of this. But now I'm going to demonstrate it in live action. All right, so I'm going to be demonstrating the gameplay on a challenge mode underground mission with no directives. Now, it's very important to note that I am able to complete this in just over 4 minutes, as you'll see during this gameplay. And another thing to note is that the health of the enemies is so low that I'm unable to stack Striker in a lot of situations. The build actually performs even better when you have enemies with marginally more health. And what that does is it allows you to more reliably stack your Striker bonus. If you kill an enemy and they die within like 5 or 10 bullets, sometimes you will end up missing their hitbox at times or losing some of that bonus that you accumulate. So it's much more powerful if you do have enemies that you can stack the bonus more reliably on. But as you can see, I absolutely tear through enemies. This is without a signature skill active. When I do take damage, it is minimal. Because of my protection from elites, because of the fact that I have very high toughness, because of the fact that I'm reliably able to proc on the move or critical save or booster shot at will, what that means is I am able to survive sniper shots, I'm able to survive flamethrowers, and regular bullet damage from a variety of NPCs, from multiple NPCs attacking me at once. This is a very reliable, super high damage build that can be used to effectively complete content, and it's right on par. It's actually better than the average estimate that we did earlier, previously, when we talked about farming methods in patch 1.5. The estimate that we gave was for completing runs in about 6 minutes per underground mission, and it was a lucrative farming method. This can complete it in about 4 minutes. Of course, that will vary based on what directives you run, based on what kind of objective that you have. Something like critical infrastructure will take longer. But the majority of runs are going to take between 4 and 5 minutes, and that is very, very efficient. Especially someone that has better aim than I do, someone that is more careful with their shots, someone that can stack the Striker bonus more effectively. Again, if you encounter something like an LMB shield user, just to talk about Striker for a couple of seconds here, you can stack the Striker bonus on enemy shields. What this means is that you can unload an entire magazine into a shield and accumulate nearly a 90% bonus before even switching to other targets. As you can see though, when you do land shots against something like a cleaner, very, very short time to kill. Very, very efficient build. It's something that I'm super confident with, and because of the increased kill XP, I am going to be using this for all of my farming from here on out. It's actually replaced my defense build, my D3 F&C build, for my preferred PvE content, machine build, because what it allows me to do is not only complete the activities just as fast, if not faster, but actually gain more from progressive activities that I complete. Through the proficiency caches, which not only give you 2 pieces of gear, they give you a shot at named items, and they also give you Phoenix credits. So it's a very lucrative farming method, whatever you choose to do, made even better by the fact that the build is spec'd purely for PvE. Now, again, it really comes down to how efficient you are with it. I kind of say this in every single video. We actually had a joke going in the comment section at one point about how this is kind of my catchphrase now. But someone with better aim than what I have is going to be able to use Striker to devastating effect. Not only will you be gaining all the extra damage from damage to elites, from enemy armor damage, you will also be gaining up to 100% increased weapon damage as a baseline. Now, 100% increased weapon damage may seem difficult to acquire with Striker. It does require landing a lot of consecutive shots, but it is the highest single source weapon damage bonus in the game at this time. And what that means is that if used properly, Striker is the most efficient gear set. It does break down in PvP because a lot of people roll around sporadically, but in PvE, where you can predict movements, where you can reliably CC enemies, you are capable of dealing huge amounts of damage with little to no trouble or little to no hassle. So as you can see there, I have progressed through. I did kill the final boss. All in all, I did acquire about 5 or 6 between 6 and 10 pieces of gear per underground run, but with that one, I believe I acquired 6 after everything was said and done. You can also see that the build is extremely tanky because of my protection from elites, because of my high, intrinsic built-in toughness, and the fact that I can proc different mitigation bonuses. I am able to get easily about 900 to 1 million toughness, 900,000 to 1 million, and it's something that can remain alive in a lot of situations when other builds would go down. It's a very efficient carry build if you're trying to run your squad through content, and it's a very efficient solo build as well. So that's going to wrap it up, guys. As you can see there, completed, all set and done. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support the channel, please check out the links below, and as always, have a nice night.